At 30,000 feet, the world was a canvas of clouds and quiet. But in row 17, Jack Dawson carried a weight heavier than the plane itself. A single father, broken, battered by life, he sat in 17A, his calloused hands adjusting the tiny oxygen monitor on his daughter's wrist. Emily, 6 years old and fragile as a wisp, traced hearts on the fogged-up airplane window, her finger weaving dreams against the cold glass. "You ever wonder what silence sounds like up here?" Jack murmured, his voice low, like a secret shared with the sky. Emily didn't look up, her focus on the delicate swirls she drew. "I think it sounds like this," she whispered, finishing one last heart before resting her head on his shoulder. Jack closed his eyes, letting the drone of the engines fill the hollow space between them. Not a peaceful hum, but a fragile pause, like the world holding its breath before a storm. Jack, 38, wore the weariness of a man who'd spent too many nights mending broken pipes and promises, and too few mending his own fractured soul. His faded jeans and gray hoodie, stamped with the ghost of a defunct union logo, told a story of labor and loss. Beside him, Emily, his entire universe, clutched a one-eared stuffed bear, its worn fur a testament to her battles. Her pale cheeks and lips, tinged blue when she laughed too hard, hid a heart that struggled to keep time. Across the aisle in 17C, Charlotte Hale sat, her navy blazer crisp, her silk blouse pristine, a CEO hiding behind a pseudonym and an untouched tablet. Her arms were crossed, her eyes guarded, as if shielding herself from the mirror of her own mistakes. A drone navigation failure that hadn't yet hit the headlines, but loomed like a guillotine. She'd booked this flight to flee, not the world, but herself. "Excuse me," Jack said softly, his voice cutting through the cabin's hum. "Mind if I slip by? She needs the restroom." He nodded toward Emily, who squirmed with restless energy. Charlotte shifted her legs without a word, her face a mask of detachment, her eyes flicking briefly to his before returning to the blank screen. "Thank you, lady," Emily chirped, her voice a small spark in the dim cabin. Charlotte's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. "You're welcome, little one," she replied, her tone softer than she intended. Jack navigated the tight aisle, brushing past a beverage cart wedged by row 16. A flight attendant shot him a glance. Another tired man in tired clothes, another story she'd seen 100 times. Jack nodded anyway, a reflex of respect, even when no one returned it. Back in his seat, Emily curled into his side, her tiny hand gripping his forearm like an anchor. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice fragile as frost, "do you think my heart will ever beat like other kids?" Jack's breath caught, his chest tightening with a love too big for words. He forced a smile, the kind that stays on the surface, never reaching the eyes. "Your heart, baby, it beats stronger than most. It knows what's worth beating for." Across the aisle, Charlotte overheard, her gaze stealing sideways. She studied Jack's profile. The unshaven jaw, the faint scar near his temple, the weight of years he carried like a silent debt. He wasn't just a father, he was a man who'd been broken and rebuilt, piece by jagged piece. Then the plane shuddered, a subtle jolt, like turbulence stirring from a restless sleep. Jack's eyes snapped open, sharp and alert. A low metallic clunk reverberated through the floor, followed by a flicker of the overhead lights. Most passengers didn't notice, lost in their screens or naps. But to Jack, it was a warning, a whisper of chaos clawing at the edges. Emily sat up, her voice small. "What was that, Daddy?" He brushed her hair back, his tone steady. "Just the plane stretching its legs, sweetheart." But Charlotte felt it too, her posture stiffening, her eyes darting to the flight attendant, securing a cart with practiced calm. Then came a second jolt, sharper, more insistent. The engine's steady hum faltered, dipping into an eerie, uneven whine. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," crackled the intercom, the voice calm but brittle, like glass about to shatter. "We're experiencing a temporary mechanical issue. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Then silence, a deafening void as the right engine died. No explosion, no flames, just an absence that screamed louder than any alarm. Jack's pulse quickened, Not from fear, but from recognition. This wasn't just a failed engine. It was a moment choosing him, pulling him from the shadows of his past. The lights flickered again, plunging half the cabin into darkness. Gasps echoed. A child's cry pierced the air, and overhead bins rattled as the pressure shifted. A woman in 21B sobbed quietly. From the front, a flight attendant, Sandra Martinez, her uniform crisp but her voice trembling, sprinted down the aisle, her eyes locked on row 17. "Jack Dawson!" she barked, her finger jabbing toward him. "Cockpit, now!" Charlotte's head whipped around, stunned. "Wait, him?" A businessman in 18D scoffed, his voice dripping with disbelief. "That guy looks like he fixes vending machines." But Sandra's tone sliced through the noise like a blade. "Cockpit, now!" Jack blinked, his heart pounding but his resolve steady. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice low. Emily's small hand clutched his sleeve, her eyes wide. "Daddy?" He knelt, smoothing her hair, his touch gentle but firm. "I'll be back before you draw your next heart, okay?" Her voice trembled. "Promise?" He nodded, standing tall. Charlotte watched, her breath catching as the slouch in his shoulders vanished, replaced by a quiet, unshakable purpose. She reached for his arm as he passed. "Are you a pilot?" Jack paused, his eyes meeting hers, steady and haunted. "No," he said softly. "I was one." He moved down the flickering aisle, each step pulling him closer to a chaos he'd once sworn to leave behind. The cockpit door hung ajar, swaying with each tremor of the wounded plane. Jack stepped inside, and the scene hit him like a memory he'd tried to bury. Captain Rodriguez slumped over the yoke, his breaths shallow, eyes glassy, fighting for air. The first officer lay unconscious, his oxygen mask dangling uselessly. Warning lights blinked like dying stars, and the cold whisper of altitude loss filled the air. Jack didn't hesitate. His hands moved with the precision of muscle memory, a dance of instinct over fear. He eased Rodriguez back, deactivating the autopilot override, wresting manual control from a system fighting to fail. The plane lurched, then steadied, gliding uneasily, but no longer plummeting. "Who are you?" Sandra's voice came from behind, sharp with desperation and awe. Jack didn't look up, his fingers flying across switches, assessing damage, coaxing life from dying systems. "Former Air National Guard," he said, his voice steady as stone. "C-130 instructor. Flew emergency night ops out of Kandahar. Left the sky 10 years ago." Sandra stared, as if he'd just claimed he could walk on water. "Can you fly this?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope. Jack turned, his eyes locking onto hers, a fire burning beneath the calm. "If I can't," he said, "none of us are walking away." She nodded, stepping back, and Jack slid into the captain's seat, the metal cold but familiar, like a ghost welcoming him home. The cockpit was no sanctuary, but to Jack Dawson, it was a battlefield he'd once called home. The cold metal of the captain's chair pressed against his back, familiar yet unforgiving, like an old friend who'd never forgotten his scars. His hands, rough from years of fixing what others broke, danced across the controls with a precision born of instinct, not training. The altimeter spun downward, a relentless countdown. Airspeed flickered erratically, the engines silent as graves, and the hydraulics sputtered like a dying pulse. Yet the trim controls responded, a faint lifeline in a sea of warnings. Jack's eyes scanned the blinking instruments, not for answers, but for time. Time to keep 137 souls, including one fragile heartbeat in row 17, from slipping into the void. He flicked the comm switch, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Flight 847 to ATC. Do you copy? Mayday, mayday. Dual engine failure. Crew incapacitated. We're gliding uncontrolled." Static answered, a hollow hiss that mocked his urgency. He toggled the external frequency again, his jaw tight. Nothing. In the cabin, Charlotte Hale sat frozen in 17C, her eyes locked on the cockpit door, where Jack had vanished. A child's whimper pierced the air behind her, and a soft prayer in Spanish drifted from 2 rows back. "Is he flying the plane now?" the businessman in 18D sneered, his voice torn between scorn and fear. Charlotte didn't answer. Her mind replayed the way Jack had looked at Emily, like she was the gravity holding his world in place. And the way he'd looked at her, not as a CEO cloaked in power, but as a human, raw and real. It had been years since anyone saw her that way. Emily tugged at her sleeve, her pale lips trembling. Is he going to fix it? Charlotte knelt, meeting the girl's wide eyes, her heart clenching at the faint blue tint creeping into Emily's face. He's going to do everything he can, she whispered, her voice soft but sure. And I think your dad's better at fixing things than anyone I've ever met. Emily's smile was fragile but fierce, and she leaned against Charlotte's arm, her small frame seeking warmth. Charlotte hesitated, then let her stay, a quiet bond forming in the shadow of uncertainty. In the cockpit, a crackle broke the silence. This is Jack Dawson, assuming command of Flight 847. Both pilots incapacitated, total power loss, executing dead-stick glide. A pause, then a voice from ATC, sharp with disbelief. Say again, did you say Jack Dawson? Jack's brow furrowed, his fingers tightening on the yoke as the plane groaned, shedding another 1,000 feet. Time scraped by, each second a blade against his resolve. Then a new voice cut through, calm, clipped, unmistakably military. This is Commander Sarah Lynn, National Guard, 139th Airlift Wing. Jack Dawson is verified. Give him whatever he needs. Jack's chest tightened. Sarah Lynn. A decade had passed since her voice last anchored him, back in the dust and fire of Kandahar. Her trust hit harder than the crisis itself. Jack, she said, switching to a secure channel, her tone softer, almost intimate. You got this? I remember Kandahar. I remember you. The sky hasn't forgotten who you are. He swallowed, the weight of her faith pressing against old wounds. No speeches, Sarah, he said, his voice low. I need vectors. Nearest viable strip? 73 nautical miles to Greensboro, she replied. Wind east-southeast, mild. Clear skies. No power means no second tries. You ready? Jack exhaled, his eyes flicking to the tiny photo taped to the console. Emily at 3, grinning with missing teeth, clutching a model plane they'd built from scrap. I wasn't ready to lose her, he whispered. Then don't, Sarah said, her voice a lifeline across the static. Jack toggled back to the internal systems. Oxygen levels wavered, cabin pressure clung to survival, but the manual flaps responded. He adjusted the glide path, his hands steady, guided by a lesson etched in his bones. A good pilot flies the plane, a great one flies the people. And right now, 137 lives, including Emily's faint heartbeat, rested in his calloused hands. In the cabin, Charlotte stared out the window, clouds drifting past like ghosts of breath. Emily shifted closer, her shallow breaths a quiet rhythm against Charlotte's side. This stranger, this father in a faded hoodie, had walked into chaos and become its calm. What kind of man does that? Not the ones with polished titles or corner offices, but the ones who faced fire and emerged holding someone else's hand. Maybe this flight wasn't her undoing. Maybe it was her landing. The cockpit reeked of sweat, metal, and memory. Jack's pulse thundered, a drumbeat in his throat, but his hands never wavered. Every functioning screen screamed warnings. Hydraulic pressure fading, altitude bleeding like an open wound. Engines silent as stone. Only the wind answered now, a relentless howl beyond the glass. He adjusted the trim by feel, not grace, but the hard-earned instinct of a man who'd flown into hell and back. His eyes flicked across dead panels, searching not for data, but for time. Time to bring Emily home. Sandra hovered at the cockpit door, gripping the frame as if it might vanish. Need anything? She asked, her voice a mix of fear and trust. Jack kept his eyes forward. Yeah, he said, a wry edge to his tone. 2 more hours of sky. I'll settle for 15 minutes of faith. She almost smiled, then stopped. The crew's with you, she said. He nodded. Thanks. Let's hope gravity's in a negotiating mood. In row 17, Charlotte sat still, not frozen by fear, but by something deeper, a recognition of courage she hadn't known she craved. Her hands rested on Emily's blanket-draped legs, the girl's shallow breaths like waves lapping a distant shore. Charlotte, who thrived on control, felt steadied by a man who embraced the fall. She reached into the seat back pocket, pulling out Emily's notebook. Past scribbles of stars and rainbows, she found a drawing. A stick figure man in a pilot's uniform, standing on clouds, a winged heart above him. Beneath it, in wobbly letters, "My daddy is a sky hero." Charlotte's breath caught, her fingers tracing the words. In the cockpit, Sarah's voice crackled again. "Altitude's dropping faster than expected. Adjust your approach. Greensboro's giving you priority." Jack leaned into the mic, his voice dry. "No surprise, she's falling like a steel piano." "You okay up there?" Sarah asked. Jack's smirk was bitter. "Flying a dead plane with 137 lives in the back seat. Okay isn't the word." Sarah paused. "You're not alone, Jack." Her words cracked something open. Not panic, but memory. A desert airstrip under a midnight sky, a burning C-130, a young officer trapped in the wreckage. Jack had dived back in, not because it was brave, but because it was who he was. He'd tried to bury that man, but Emily's heartbeat had pulled him back. Across the aisle, the businessman cleared his throat. "You really think he knows what he's doing?" Charlotte turned, her voice steady. "That man," she said, "was born to fly in storms." Outside, the sky burned orange, hope filtering through the clouds like a promise waiting to be kept. Charlotte Hale leaned close to Emily, her voice a whisper meant only for the child's ears, a confession carried on the edge of a trembling breath. "I used to fear pilots," she murmured, her words heavy with a past she rarely spoke of. "I lost someone in a crash years ago. I swore I'd never fly again." Emily blinked up at her, eyes wide but weary, her lips faintly blue in the dim cabin light. Charlotte's gaze softened, her hand brushing the girl's cheek. "But your dad, he doesn't just fly planes. He lifts people, even from the ground." Emily's sleepy smile was a flicker of light in the growing dark. "He says love is heavier than wings," she whispered. Charlotte's throat tightened, her voice cracking like thin ice. "Yeah," she said, "and somehow he carries it anyway." As the last rays of daylight bled into dusk, the passengers of Flight 847 sat cloaked not in panic, but in something rarer. A quiet, unshouted faith, the kind that doesn't demand miracles but believes in them anyway. In the cockpit, Jack Dawson gripped the yoke, not to tame the plane, but to steady himself. The cabin was a crypt of silence, broken only by the hollow chime of failing systems. Each beep a reminder of the life draining from the aircraft. At 22,000 feet, there was no margin for error, no engines to lean on, only the perilous art of a dead stick glide, a term pilots whispered with equal parts reverence and dread. Sarah Lynn's voice crackled through his headset, steady but urgent. "You're at 22,000 feet, Jack. Descent rate gives you 12 minutes, max." He exhaled, his voice calm but laced with grit. "Copy. That's 9 more minutes than I need." She paused, a smile in her tone. "Still the same cocky bastard." Jack's eyes flickered to the photo of Emily taped to the console. "No," he murmured. "That guy didn't have a daughter." In the cabin, Charlotte sat rigid as the plane dipped subtly, a shiver through the fuselage. The overhead lights flickered like candles in a storm, and her eyes darted to the bins above, then back to Emily, whose breaths had grown shallow, fragile as paper. Charlotte pressed a hand to the girl's chest, her own heart pounding. "Hey, you okay?" Emily's voice was a faint tear in the silence. "I feel floaty." Charlotte forced a smile, masking the fear clawing at her chest. "That's just the altitude, sweetheart. Your dad's bringing us down." Emily's eyes searched hers. "Is he scared?" Charlotte glanced toward the sealed cockpit door, picturing Jack's steady hands and haunted eyes. "No," she whispered, brushing Emily's hair. "He's not scared of falling. He's scared of not getting you home." In the cockpit, Jack's body became an extension of the plane, legs braced on the rudder, left hand on trim, right hand coaxing the elevator pitch. His shirt clung to him, soaked with sweat, the captain's seat a crucible of fire and steel. His lips moved silently, calculating. Wait, wind from the east, drag without power. Sarah's voice returned, softer now. "You're doing what most only train for in sims, Jack. You know that, right?" He wiped sweat from his brow, his voice sharp. Don't say that. Why not? She pressed. Because if I think about what this is, I'll lose what it has to be. His tone dropped, raw and quiet. This isn't a movie, Sarah. No redemption arc, no swelling soundtrack. Just me, gravity, and a kid who needs to see tomorrow. In the cabin, a child's cry pierced the air. The businessman in 18D lurched to his feet, voice shrill. We're crashing, aren't we? Sandra Martinez, the flight attendant, blocked his path, her eyes blazing. Sit down, sir. He sputtered. I demand to speak to the pilot. Sandra's voice cut like a blade. He's flying, not taking lunch orders. Unless you've logged more hours than gravity, sit and breathe. Stunned, he sank back. Charlotte caught Sandra's eye, a nod passing between them. Silent respect, a thread of trust woven in the storm. Jack's voice crackled over the intercom, steady as stone. Greensboro Tower, this is Flight 847, altitude 16,000, descending, dead stick approach, requesting full emergency clearance. A young controller replied, Flight 847, cleared for runway 22, winds calm, fire and rescue on standby. You've got priority. Jack nodded to the empty cockpit, unaccustomed to being first. He toggled the cabin intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jack Dawson. I'm your best shot at seeing the ground again. A nervous chuckle rippled through the cabin. We've lost both engines. We're gliding on lift, not luck. Trust gravity, trust me. We've got one shot. He paused, voice softening. And if you're praying, keep it up. I'm flying, but I'll take all the help I can get. The intercom clicked off, leaving a silence that hummed with unity. A man in 22B clasped his wife's hand. A teen in 19A pulled out her earbuds. A mother pressed her forehead to her child's. Charlotte, clutching Emily's hand, whispered, He's not flying us down. He's lifting us home. At 10,000 feet, the cockpit was a confessional. Jack's every move a prayer written in airspeed and altitude. No thrust, no second chances. Just a father rediscovering who he was for the sake of who he loved. Greensboro Tower, Flight 847 on final, he said, voice calm as the horizon dimmed. Sarah whispered through the headset, Bring them in, Jack. He nodded, eyes fixed on the golden thread of Greensboro's lights. Roger that. The plane descended not by fear, but by will. A man refusing to fall when his daughter needed him to soar. The controller's voice broke in, tentative. Flight 847, we're not reading your transponder. Who's in command? Jack's jaw clenched, fighting the glide slope and bureaucracy. This is Jack Dawson, civilian, former Air National Guard, C-130 instructor, 139th Wing. Both crew incapacitated. I've got manual control. Dead stick descent. Clear me to land. A pause, then a chilling reply. Sir, we can't verify your credentials. Please hold for supervisory confirmation. Jack's eyes flicked to the altimeter, 9,000 feet and falling. We don't have time to hold, he snapped. I'm flying 137 souls in a metal coffin. Check your radar. We're coming in. Silence stretched, threatening to unravel him. In the cabin, Charlotte caught the intercom's faint click as it cut off. She turned to Sandra, her voice low. Why'd he stop talking? Sandra shook her head. Probably switching channels. He's juggling a lot. But are they letting him land? Charlotte pressed. Sandra's hesitation was a knife to her gut. We have to do something, Charlotte said, standing. Sandra raised a brow. Like what? Charlotte's eyes flicked to her phone, then to the frightened faces around her. You said the FAA listens to verified executive channels in emergencies, right? Sandra nodded slowly. They might. Charlotte's resolve hardened. Good, because they're about to hear from someone they'll listen to. Flight 847, you're cleared for emergency approach, runway 22. All other traffic grounded. Fire and medical crews on standby. The controller's voice was a lifeline, cutting through the static. Jack Dawson exhaled, a faint smile tugging at his lips, the first crack in his stoic mask. Sarah, you always knew how to crash a party, he said, his voice low, carrying the weight of a decade-old bond. Sarah Lynn's reply came soft, almost tender. Just worry about not crashing that plane, Jack. In the cabin, a murmur rippled like a tide as Jack's voice filled the air over the intercom. steady and resolute. "This is your pilot. Greensboro Tower's given us full clearance. Final approach locked in. We'll be wheels down in under 7 minutes." Silence fell, heavy but alive. Not with cheers, but with belief, a fragile trust blooming in the hearts of strangers. Charlotte Hale slid back into 17C beside Emily, who lay curled like a fragile seed, clutching her one-eared bear as if it held her heartbeat. "You did something," Emily whispered, her voice a faint thread. Charlotte brushed a strand of hair from the girl's pale face, her eyes glistening. "I just reminded them who they're dealing with." Emily's lips curved, her certainty unshakable. "I knew they'd listen. When Daddy speaks from his heart, even the sky listens." In the cockpit, Jack locked into the final descent, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of a promise. Runway 22 stretched ahead, a black ribbon woven with golden lights, the last beacon of hope in a darkening world. He glanced at the faded photo taped to the console. Emily at 3, her gap-toothed grin holding a model plane they'd built from scraps. "Not today," he murmured. "Not this time." Sandra slipped into the cockpit, her voice soft. "Everyone's secured." Jack nodded, then paused, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thanks for trusting a stranger with a broken past." Sandra tilted her head, her eyes steady. "I didn't trust a stranger. I trusted a father with something worth fighting for." Altitude dropped to 6,000 feet, then 5,000. Charlotte clasped Emily's hand, the girl's eyes fluttering shut, her breath shallow but steadier. "You know," Charlotte whispered, "I've flown hundreds of times, first-class jets, private helicopters." Emily's eyelids twitched. "Really?" "Yeah," Charlotte said, her smile soft. "But this is the first flight where I've felt truly safe." In the control tower, a young tech turned to his supervisor, voice tense. "Sir, this Dawson guy, he's not in our active pilot database. No license on file." The supervisor's eyes stayed glued to the radar. "Yeah," he said, "and he's still the only one I'd want in that cockpit right now." Jack's gaze was fixed on the runway's glowing lights, his voice low and steady over the intercom. "Brace position, everyone. Eyes forward, hands on your heads, keep breathing." Then softer, almost to himself, "We're bringing this bird home." Every nerve in his body hummed, tuned to the yoke, to the whisper of wind over a powerless plane gliding on hope and physics. The runway shimmered, an ocean of asphalt between him and salvation. "Flaps," he muttered, fingers adjusting the manual controls with the delicacy of a musician tuning a shattered violin. Altitude 4,100 feet, airspeed 147 knots. The wind was calm, but the cabin behind him held a storm of silent prayers. In row 17, Charlotte watched Emily's face, pale as moonlight, her lips edged with a faint blue that tore at Charlotte's heart. The girl's small hands clung to her sleeve, as if gripping the edge of the world. "Does it hurt?" Charlotte asked, her voice a fragile thread. Emily shook her head. "Not really, just feels like I'm not heavy anymore." Charlotte swallowed a lump in her throat. She wasn't a mother, had never wanted to be, but in that moment, she'd have traded every deal, every boardroom, for one strong breath for this child. She pressed her forehead to Emily's. "Your dad's flying the whole sky to bring you home." Emily's smile was faint but fierce. "He told me once, some pilots fly with engines, but the good ones fly with love." Charlotte closed her eyes, the words carving a permanent place in her soul. Jack's voice returned, calm yet reverent. "Final approach, 30 seconds. No noise, no engines, just wheels and wind. This landing will feel different, but it's what we've got. I've flown 1,000 hours and worse. We'll land. We'll walk away. And tonight, you'll hold the ones you love a little tighter." A passenger in 21A whispered, "That's the first time a pilot's made me believe he's praying with us." Jack adjusted the rudder, every move a brushstroke of precision. No power meant no second chances. He guided the plane like a glider, bleeding speed against the wind, his hands steady despite the weight of 137 lives. Sarah's voice crackled. "Jack, how's it looking?" "Like I'm landing a brick in a church parking lot," he said, a wry edge to his tone. "Copy. Fire teams are ready. Everyone's holding their breath." "Tell them to keep holding," Jack replied. "We're not there yet." Charlotte gazed out the window, Greensboro's lights growing closer. The city hushed, as if it knew the miracle unfolding. "Do you hear that?" she whispered to Emily. The girl blinked. "What?" "It's your dad catching the sky." At 800 feet, the runway's threshold was a heartbeat away. Jack's hands danced across the panel, adjusting trim, feathering the descent with an artist's touch. Memories flooded him. His unit, the desert crash, the guilt he'd carried like a shadow, and Emily's voice that morning in Denver. "Will this doctor make me better, Daddy?" He hadn't answered then. Now he muttered, "Flaps full, gear locked, trim set, airspeed 126 knots. Perfect." The plane coasted, nose up, runway markings blooming into reality. No sound but the wind and the collective pulse of every soul on board. Sandra crouched by the galley, whispering a prayer. A teen in row 22, Tommy, pulled out his earbuds, eyes forward. Mrs. Keating in 19C clutched her late husband's photo, its edges creased. Charlotte felt whole, not afraid. "Hold on, little one," she whispered to Emily. "He's bringing us home." Jack murmured, "Here we go." Then contact, a reverent kiss as wheels met earth, a thud echoing through the fuselage, followed by a gentle shudder as rubber gripped asphalt, steel met friction, man met miracle. No bounce, no veer, just a glide into stillness. Jack deployed the spoilers, feeling the drag like invisible hands slowing the beast. The runway's end was a finish line drawn in mercy. When the plane stopped just past the 2,000-foot mark, Jack sat in silence, his breath caught, hands trembling. Then he laughed, a raw, cracked sound of redemption. In the cabin, time paused, then shattered. A baby's cry broke the silence, followed by a single clap, then an eruption of cheers, sobs, and applause. Not just relief, but awe at the impossible. Charlotte leaned down, kissing Emily's forehead. "You were right," she whispered. "He flew with love." Outside, emergency lights flashed, fire crews swarmed, but inside, the true rescue had already happened. Strangers had become survivors, and the quiet man in row 17 had etched his name into the sky's history. Jack stood, knees unsteady. Sandra appeared, tears streaking her face. "You did it," she whispered. He looked toward the cabin, toward Emily. "I didn't land a plane," he said. "I landed her future." Jack Dawson stood in the cockpit doorway, his breath a ragged gasp, as if he'd just surfaced from a sea of chaos. The cabin stretched before him, a quiet cathedral of stunned faces, not fixed on a uniformed hero or a decorated captain, but on a man in a faded gray hoodie and worn work boots. A man whose calloused hands and tired eyes had just carried 137 souls back to Earth. Silence spoke louder than any words he could muster. Then a small voice pierced the stillness. "Daddy!" Emily's call was a beacon, pulling his gaze to her. She stood, frail but defiant, clinging to Charlotte Hale's hand, her pale face glowing with unshakable faith. Jack moved down the aisle, each step deliberate, as if walking back from a war only he understood. When he reached her, Emily threw her arms around his waist, her face buried in his stomach. "You did it," she whispered, her voice a fragile melody. He knelt, pulling her close, holding her as if letting go might unravel the miracle. "I promised, didn't I?" he murmured into her hair. "I said we'd make it." Emily's smile was soft but sure. "You always say that, but this time, you flew without wings." Charlotte stepped back, her heart catching at the sight, her eyes never leaving Jack. When he looked up, their gazes locked, not in gratitude or awe, but in a quiet recognition, as if they'd both glimpsed the same truth in the chaos. Outside, emergency crews swarmed the plane like a second heartbeat, their lights pulsing red and blue across the tarmac. Yet no one stormed aboard. The cockpit door opened gently, the stairway rolled up with reverence. Jack stepped out, Emily cradled in his arms, her small hands clutching his shirt. No cameras flashed, no questions shouted, just nods from firefighters, air traffic controllers, and paramedics who'd seen mayhem, but rarely grace. Sandra followed, her voice a whisper. "They want to speak to the pilot." Jack glanced at the officials beyond the emergency line. then down at Emily. "Tell them I'm holding something more important right now," he said, his tone steady, unwavering. In the terminal, passengers were guided to waiting rooms, their nerves frayed but their hearts full. No injuries, only the weight of a miracle they hadn't yet grasped. Charlotte stood by a window, watching Jack settle Emily on a bench near baggage claim. He brushed her hair back as she sipped apple juice through a straw, a father and daughter sharing a moment the world now called heroic. But Jack didn't look like a hero, just a man learning to breathe again. A federal agent approached Charlotte, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Hale," he said, clearing his throat, "we know about your call to the FAA, your role in identifying the pilot. We need a statement." Charlotte's eyes flicked to Jack, then locked onto the agent's. "Here's my statement," she said, her voice sharp but calm. "He didn't land that plane for headlines. He did it for the girl in his arms. If you're wise, you'll let him go home without asking him to explain what the sky already understands." The agent hesitated, then lowered his clipboard, retreating into the crowd. As night fell and the media chased their stories elsewhere, Jack stepped into the cool North Carolina air, the taste of freedom sharp on his tongue. Charlotte joined him, arms crossed against the evening chill. "She asleep?" she asked, glancing toward Emily. Jack nodded. "Out cold. Probably the oxygen crash, but the docs say she's stable." "Good," Charlotte said, pausing. Then softer. "I've flown more times than I can count. Private jets, top pilots. But I've never felt safer than I did in 17C today." Jack's lips twitched into a faint smile. "I'm not even licensed anymore." Charlotte chuckled, her eyes warm. "Funny, that didn't matter when the sky handed you the mic." Their gazes met, and for a moment the world stilled. "You know what scared me most in that cockpit?" Jack said, his voice low, raw. Charlotte shook her head. "Not the altitude, not the silence, not even dying. It was thinking I'd forgotten how to fly when she needed me most." Charlotte stepped closer, her voice steady. "That's the thing about grace, Jack. It doesn't demand perfection. It just asks you to show up." He exhaled, glancing at the starlit sky. "Funny how it took falling to remember how to fly." Her smile was soft, knowing. "Or maybe you never forgot. You just needed a reason worth landing for." Nakur. Their eyes held, a warmth passing between them. Not the spark of romance, but the ember of two souls who'd lost their way in different skies and found each other mid-flight. Inside, Emily stirred in her sleep, her fingers curled around a photo in her backpack. Jack holding her as a baby beside a C-130, the sun in his eyes. She didn't know the world had discovered her father. She only knew he could make the sky obey. The next morning, headlines erupted. "Unidentified civilian lands jet in miracle glide. Single father saves 137 lives." But Jack wasn't reading them. He wasn't on social media or fielding calls from talk shows. He knelt in a quiet hospital room, lacing Emily's shoes. "Too tight?" he asked, adjusting the strap. She shook her head, grinning. "Just right." "You sure?" he teased. "Daddy," she said, her voice bright, "I watched you land a plane with no engines. I think you can handle Velcro." Jack laughed, a deep, soul-stirring sound he hadn't felt since before her illness stole their ease. "You're something else, you know that?" "I know," she said, matter of fact. "I get it from you." They walked out, Emily's hand in his. "I was never scared," she said. Jack glanced down. "No?" She shook her head. "Even when the engines stopped, I knew you were still flying." In the lobby, Charlotte waited, her CEO armor shed, no blazer, just a denim jacket and jeans, as if she'd finally remembered who she was beneath the titles. Emily tugged Jack's sleeve. "Look, Daddy, it's the lady from the sky." Charlotte smiled, approaching. "Hey, Captain Dawson." He winced. "Don't start." "What? Too humble for your headlines?" "I didn't land that plane to get famous," he said. Charlotte tilted her head. "Good. You're not famous. You're known. Fame fades when the cameras leave. But you've changed how people see the world, how they see themselves." Jack looked away, unaccustomed to praise from a woman who once barely met his gaze. "I read something last night," she added softly. "Some men build empires. Others build moments that outlast them." Jack blinked. "You write that?" "No," she said, smiling. "But I wish I had." Outside, a car screeched to the curb. Luis, Jack's old mechanic friend, leaned out, grinning like he'd spotted a celebrity. "Hero boy," he shouted. "You're on every channel." Jack groaned. "Great. I'll need a new face." Luis laughed. "You need a raise, and maybe a cape." Charlotte knelt to Emily. "Mind if I borrow your dad for a bit?" Emily shrugged. "Sure, but bring him back." "I always return what I borrow," Charlotte said, winking, her voice light but carrying the weight of a promise. Jack followed Charlotte a few steps from Luis's car, settling onto a bench beneath the hospital's awning, the cool night air brushing against his skin like a whispered promise. "I heard the FAA's digging into everything," Charlotte said, her voice steady but laced with concern. Jack sighed, his gaze dropping to the ground. "They're not thrilled. Technically, I'm not certified for civilian aircraft anymore. No recent flight log, no official endorsement." Charlotte's eyes narrowed, sharp and unyielding. "And yet, you brought everyone home." He shrugged, the weight of his past heavy on his shoulders. "Doesn't mean much on paper." She stepped closer, her voice cutting through his doubt. "Maybe paper's not where your story belongs anymore." Jack looked up, his brow furrowing. "What are you saying?" Charlotte reached into her bag, pulling out a slim envelope, its edges crisp against the dim light. "I made 2 calls," she said. "One to a friend at the FAA, smoothing things over. Another to someone who funds flight training for kids who've never even dreamed of the sky." Jack froze, his eyes locked on the envelope. "They want to talk to you. About teaching. About building something real. About giving wings to those who've only known the ground." His breath caught, the offer landing like a spark in a heart long dimmed. "Why would you do that?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Charlotte's gaze softened, a faint smile curling her lips. "Because you showed me leadership isn't about control. It's about courage, care, and showing up when no one's watching." She paused, her tone teasing but warm. "Also, I needed an excuse to see you again." Jack's smirk broke through, a rare glint of lightness. "That sounds more honest." She pulled a folded slip of paper from her pocket, holding it out. "My number, in case you feel like flying again. Not just planes, but towards something new." He took it carefully, as if it might dissolve in his hands. "I'm not good at beginnings," he admitted, his voice raw. Charlotte tilted her head, her smile steady. "That's okay. I'm pretty good at helping people finish what they start. Maybe we'll meet in the middle." Their eyes held, a quiet understanding passing between them. Not a promise, not yet, but the stirrings of something real. "Thank you," Jack said softly, "for believing when I didn't ask anyone to." Charlotte stepped closer, her voice a private vow. "You didn't have to ask. A man who flies into fire for his daughter deserves someone flying back to him." Their hands brushed, a fleeting touch that carried the weight of possibility. From the car, Emily's voice broke the moment. "Daddy, I'm getting old over here." Jack laughed, shaking his head, and turned to Charlotte. "See you again?" She nodded, eyes bright. "Count on it." As he walked back to the car, Charlotte stood still, arms crossed, watching the man who'd saved a plane fade into a new dawn. No engines, no fanfare, just quiet motion. It felt like the love story she'd never known she was waiting for, one that landed softly without a sound. The next day, headlines blazed across screens. "Civilian pilot defies odds in miracle landing. Single father saves 137 souls." Grainy footage looped endlessly, security clips, passenger videos, shaky zooms of Flight 847 gliding silently to Earth. At its heart was Jack, stepping off the plane in worn boots and a gray hoodie, Emily in his arms, untouched by the clamor. But Jack wasn't watching. In Luis's garage, he stood beside a rusted Mustang, wiping grease from his hands, the cracked TV screen flickering nearby. Luis leaned on the counter, grinning. "5th time this hour. They're obsessed." Jack didn't respond. Luis clicked the remote off. "I thought being invisible was your superpower," he said. "I was wrong. Your real power. You show up when no one else does." Jack shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "That's just what dads do." Luis chuckled. "Plenty of dads walk away. You landed a damn plane." At crosstown, Charlotte stood in her glass and steel office, the silence colder than she remembered. Her awards gleamed on the shelf, proud but hollow. She gazed out at the city, coffee cooling in her hands, when a knock came. Her assistant peeked in. CNN wants an exclusive. You and Jack together. Charlotte turned, her voice firm. Tell them no. He didn't save lives for ratings, and neither did I. The assistant hesitated, then handed her a manila envelope. Inside, stills from airport cameras captured Charlotte watching Jack. Not in fear or awe, but in recognition. She set them down, whispering, "The world saw a pilot. I saw a man." That night, Jack sat with Emily at their small kitchen table, the hum of the fridge and the rustle of wind filling the quiet. Emily clutched a crayon, her notebook open. "I drew you," she said. Jack dried his hands from washing dishes and leaned over. The page showed a bright yellow plane, a stick figure in the cockpit. "You gave me a full head of hair," he teased, smiling. "You had hero hair that day," she said, leaning against him. He laughed, pulling her close. "Hero hair? That a thing?" "It is now," she said, grinning. "You didn't do it alone, right?" Jack's eyes softened. "The sky helped. You helped." She nodded, certain. "I know." A week later, a plain envelope slid under their door, hand-delivered, no stamp, just Jack's name in sharp military script. He found it while tying Emily's shoelaces, her lunchbox half-zipped, cartoon stickers peeling at the edges. "What's that?" she asked, curious. "Don't know," Jack murmured, picking it up. "Looks official," Emily said, grinning. "No glitter." He chuckled, opening it slowly. Inside, a single sheet bore the Air Force seal. To Mr. Jack Dawson. Some pilots fly with clearance, others with purpose. You are the rare soul who carries both. This is your reinstatement. The runway is yours. Any sky, any day. Respectfully, Commander Sarah Lynn, 139th Airlift Wing. Jack read it twice, then tucked it into Emily's notebook beside her drawing, a quiet vow to himself. That evening, a knock. Charlotte stood at the door, wind tousling her hair, a paper bag in hand, her smile shy but sure. "Brought dinner," she said. Jack stepped aside. "Didn't know we were doing this." "Neither did I," she replied, stepping into the modest apartment, its warmth a stark contrast to her sterile office. Her eyes caught the photo pinned above the sink. Flight 847 touching down, a moment frozen in time. "Nice touch," she said. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Not exactly Architectural Digest." Charlotte turned, her voice soft. "No, but it's the first place I've walked into where the walls feel alive." He paused. "That's your way of saying you missed me?" She smiled, stepping closer. "It's my way of saying I came back on purpose." They sat together, Jack, Charlotte, Emily, sharing fries and fried chicken from paper wrappers, laughter spilling over spilled sauce, and stories of the sky. No cameras, no headlines, just three souls grounded in connection, the start of something undefined but undeniable. Charlotte brushed Emily's bangs aside, whispering, "Your dad didn't just land a plane." Emily looked up, eyes bright. "He landed us all." Jack unfolded the letter, its single page heavy with purpose. As his eyes traced the words, his jaw tightened, fingers gripping the edges as memories flooded back. He wasn't in his cramped kitchen anymore, but in a Missouri hangar 14 years ago, learning to fly on raw instinct. He was in a desert windstorm, guiding a burning C-130 to safety with 30 paratroopers clinging to hope, his heart pounding in his throat. And he was in Flight 847's cockpit, the sky silent, whispering now. The letter's words seared into him. "Jack, some pilots fly with clearance, others with courage. You flew with conviction, a rare force. Your actions on Flight 847 weren't just heroic. They were a masterclass in calm under fire, leadership when no one's watching, a man protecting what matters most. We'll use your approach in emergency training. This isn't a summons or a contract, it's a door, open as long as you choose to step through. Respectfully, Commander Michael Blaine, Deputy Director of Emergency Aviation Operations." That afternoon, Charlotte arrived, not with corporate polish, but with 2 coffees and a knowing glance. "You read it," she said, handing him a cup. Jack nodded. "Yeah." "Going back?" she asked, her voice soft but searching. He glanced at Emily, cross-legged on the floor, taping paper hearts to the fridge, her world finally steady. She's happy here, he said. Stable. I've learned to keep the ground from shifting under her. Charlotte stepped closer, her eyes piercing his doubt. You didn't just land a plane, Jack. You showed the world the sky belongs to anyone with heart. His gaze clouded. What if I'm only good in crises? What if flying's the only place I'm me, because I don't have to be anyone else? She leaned in, unwavering. What if that's not true? What if you've always been that man, just waiting for the right seat? Jack's lips twitched into a faint smile. You've got a way with words. Charlotte laughed softly. I write better for others than myself. What's your speech then? He asked. She paused, then shrugged. Something like, don't let fear masquerade as logic. Don't let comfort fool you into thinking it's peace. Jack stared at the letter. Is it crazy to want this? No, she said instantly. What's crazy is thinking you need permission. He met her eyes. What if I fall? Her answer was a quiet vow. Then fall into something that matters. That night, with Emily asleep, Jack sat in the dim living room, the letter glowing on the table. Charlotte curled up on the couch, reading a tattered paperback. Do you miss her? He asked. Who? The you before the CEO title, the one who didn't always have to win. She closed the book, thoughtful. Some days, but she's still here, waiting for something worth speaking for. Jack sat beside her. You're not quiet. You're measured. That's different. She smiled. And you? You're a mechanic who's always been a pilot. Their shoulders brushed, and for the first time in years, Jack felt a moment that didn't demand he earn it. Just a quiet landing of presence. At dawn, he stood by Emily's door, watching her sleep, her breath soft, her face serene. Every near loss, every mile of unforgiving sky flickered in his mind. You're why I fly, he whispered, then tucked the letter into her notebook, a seed for a future unwritten. A year later, snow dusted the city, not a threat, but a homecoming. Hearth Village stood on a quiet midtown block, no longer just a shelter, but a heartbeat. Greenhouses blooming with winter herbs, a reading nook with stories in 3 languages, murals splashing color across brick. In a cottage by the garden, Jack stirred golden mac and cheese, humming a tune from a life he'd almost forgotten. Charlotte slid her arms around him, teasing, Real mac and cheese again? Only the best for today, he said, grinning. Box stuff's a crime on a day like this. She kissed his cheek. You're getting sentimental. Don't tell. It'll ruin my rugged image. Outside, Emily stood among a dozen kids, oversized goggles perched on her head, teaching them to pre-flight paper gliders. A sign read, Wings for Emily, Flight Engineering and Dream Lab. From 10 local kids, it had grown, with a waiting list and volunteers, pilots, engineers, even a NASA retiree with freeze-dried ice cream. What do elevators do? Emily called. A shy girl answered, They make you go up or down. Exactly, Emily beamed. And sometimes you don't need engines. Just glide. Jack watched from the window, his voice catching. She's more grounded than I ever was. Charlotte stood beside him. She's lift too. That's what makes her unstoppable. He laughed softly. Uncatchable. You're not catching her, Charlotte said. You're teaching her to soar. That evening, Hearth Village glowed with string lights, laughter, and clinking plates. Kids tossed paper planes with names on their wings. Emily climbed onto a crate, tapping a spoon against her cup. Excuse me, she called, silencing the crowd. A year ago, my daddy flew a plane with no engines. They called him a hero, but I always knew he was. Jack's fingers tightened on his glass. This place, she continued, Wings for Emily, isn't just for me. It's for every kid who thinks they're too small, too quiet, too scared to be brave. You don't need to roar to fly. You just need someone to believe you can. Applause shook the room. Charlotte leaned into Jack, eyes shining. She's got your courage. She's got your timing, he whispered back. As snow fell in gentle waves, Jack stood outside under the stars, Charlotte at his side. He pointed to the brightest one. See that? I used to think that's where hearts went when they stopped. She slipped her hand into his. And now? He smiled, eyes on the sky. Now I know it's where they go when they start beating again. She leaned closer. I used to fear falling. And now, he asked, I'm more afraid of never jumping. Jack's laugh was soft, full. Then let's jump, Charlotte. Beneath a sky that once tried to claim them, two souls who'd learned to land took off together, quietly, fearlessly, toward a future they hadn't dared dream of until they found their wings in the fall. If this story stirred your soul, if it reminded you that courage whispers, love mends, and quiet hearts can weather the fiercest storms, share where you're watching from, your city, your corner of the world. Your stories mean everything. For more tales of resilience and human connection, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Thank you for joining this journey. Wherever you are, may you feel safe, seen, and ready to soar. Until next time, stay grounded, keep flying.